All right, so this unit is going to look at rational functions, which we've talked about a tiny bit before, just in terms of what the graph looks like. So now we'll actually do some things with the rational functions. And the really big thing that we'll do is we'll reduce rational functions and we'll solve rational functions. And there are two really, really common things that get asked in the Regents exam. So number one, what is a rational function? All right, really, really simple to look for. A rational function is a ratio of polynomial functions. All right, that all sounds great. I got a little thing there. Rational functions are fractions where there is an x in the denominator. All right, that's the big thing we have to remember. All right, so rational functions, if something's rational, there has to be an x in the denominator. So any fraction where there's an x in the denominator, not any fraction. If that's the fraction, 1/2, that's not a rational function. But the second it has an x in the denominator, that is a rational function. So it has to have an x in the denominator. Another thing to really look out for, and this will be something that we'll have to talk about as we go through and figure out some different things about these, is the denominator of a fraction can never be 0 in general ever, because that's division by 0. We can't do division by 0. So anytime we're working with one of these things, we want to make sure that the denominator is not 0. And that's going to create some things that we'll look for when we go through. All right. The other thing that's going to happen in here is we're going to have to look for these asymptotes. All right. Remember, an asymptote from earlier in the year is a line that a graph will never touch or cross. A line that a graph will never touch or cross. It just gets closer and closer to it. Rational functions are going to have asymptotes. They're almost always going to have more than one asymptote. And remember, that's when the graph looks something like this. All right. So if I had an asymptote that was maybe right here, and usually they're dotted lines, my graph might go like this. And then it might go like this. And so this dotted line right here would never get touched or crossed by the graph. And the issue with the calculator sometimes is it doesn't understand asymptotes. So it may look like the graph just kind of ends. So we'll talk about that as we get into doing some graphing things. But the biggest thing here in general is to understand is that we have to have an x in the denominator. Number one has to be an x in the denominator. All right, and then the second piece is the denominator can't be 0 after we start to solve them.